There are, in the United States, two new elements in the crisis. The first is the growing concern about the deficit, like in Europe. In fact, Obama has even talked about freezing discretionary spending, and that's motivated by the calculations which show that by the end of the decade, the U.S. debt to GDP ratio will be around 100%, much higher than Spain's current debt to GDP ratio, and not actually much far different from that of Greece. Well, my own view, and is a general one both for Europe and the United States, is that the response to the worry about deficits is that we should be focusing on a high return investment spending, and if you did that, it would actually lower long-term debt. So in other words, the financial markets were very short-sighted in their decisions about subprime mortgage and their focus on fees and trying to make revenues in the short run before the crisis. And now the financial markets are again being very short-sighted, focusing only on the deficits. No company, some of you are in business, know you would only look at one side of a company's balance sheet. If you look at the liabilities, you want to look at the assets. And what really is important is the net worth. And if your liabilities go up, but your assets go up even more, your net worth goes up and you're in better shape. Every firm has to grow, or most firms grow, by, in part, borrowing. And the same thing is true for countries. The problem is the financial market is very strange, and I think there's a political agenda here, is very strange in government, in the public sector, in only talking about one side of the balance sheet, the debt. And you have to look at the assets. So if you spend the money for investments, it grows the economy in the short run, it grows the economy in the long run. When your economy grows, you get more tax revenue in the short run, you get more tax revenue in the long run. And all it takes for the United States, I've done the calculations, all it takes is about a 5 to 6% return on these investments, and the long-term national debt is lower. And if you look at the returns that the United States has historically gotten, it's far more than this 5 or 6%. In fact, investments in technology have yields 20, 30, 40%. So it's very clear that if you're concerned about the long-term financial position, you should engage in you should not cut back on these kinds of investment. What you should cut back on is wasteful spending, where you don't get any returns. For instance, in the United States, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year on unnecessary military expenditures. Hundreds of billions of dollars on weapons that don't work against enemies that don't exist. And those are clearly things that could be cut back with, that don't add anything to our long-term fiscal strength. But the problem is the worry about the deficit is likely to lead to curtailing government spending before there's a robust recovery. One of the other element is the healthcare reform, and the effects of this continue to remain uncertain. Well, let me try to be clear about what is the fundamental problem in the United States and to some extent in the world economy. And that is what had sustained the American economy before the crisis was a bubble. The housing bubble allowed Americans to consume beyond their means. That consumption sustained America's economy and the global economy. In fact, we not only consumed beyond our means, our savings rate went down to 0. And anybody who looked at that would have said, that's not sustainable. One of my predecessors as chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors said it, that which is not sustainable won't be sustained. And of course, it wasn't. But the problem is that we can't and we shouldn't go back to the world as it was before 2007. We can't go back to a savings rate of 0. Some people are hoping that we will, but it would be a disaster if we did. So that leaves the question, what will fill in the hole? It's very important to realize this is the issue because, unfortunately, a number of people in the Obama administration and many in the financial markets didn't understand this because they thought all that we need to do is fix the banks. And once we fix the banks, the economy is back to normal. But even after we fix the banks, we're back to this fundamental problem. What will replace the consumption that will be inevitably lower because people will again start to save? But the financial system is still not working in the United States and many other countries. It's, as I said before, pulled back from the brink, but as I showed in the chart, it's not lending. So in fact, our financial system is not really functioning in the way that it should be. So the problem, as I said before, was that there was a hope of a short-lived downturn, which said that once the banking system was repaired, the private sector would recover. Only temporary help will be required, but the downturn was deeper than expected. Some people, as a result of this, have said the stimulus didn't work. Look at the unemployment with the stimulus was 10%. But that's the wrong reading. Without the stimulus in the United States, the unemployment would have been 12%. The administration thought the unemployment rate was going to be 10% and they were going to bring it down to 8%. But they were looking at the world through what you might call rosy glasses. I want to put this a little bit in a global perspective because in addition to the problem I just described in the United States, there are two other problems that were really highlighted in the UN Commission, which I chaired, which its report has recently come out. A commission on reforming the international monetary and financial system in the wake of the global crisis. The first factor was that the mismanagement of the 97-98 East Asia crisis led to reserve accumulation. Emerging markets, developing countries, particularly in Asia, were setting aside hundreds of billions of dollars for reserves to protect themselves against another crisis. The prime minister of one of the countries that was involved in the East Asia crisis put it to me in the following way. He said, we were in the class of 97. We learned what happens if you don't have enough reserves. The IMF comes in, takes away your economic sovereignty, pushes bad policies on you, and you go from downturns into recessions, recessions into depressions. He said, never again will we allow that to happen. And so they and all the other countries started savings, adding to their reserves. The consequence is that they've increased their own security, but the problem with saving is that you are not spending. And if you're not spending, there's a lack of aggregate demand at the global level. The problem is that this problem has been made worse in this crisis because those countries that had large reserves that they could draw upon, like China, even Russia, have done much better in the crisis than those countries that didn't have reserves. So the demand for reserves has actually increased, which is a worry even the IMF has come to recognize. The second problem is growing inequality in most countries of the world. And why is that a problem? Well, when you effectively transfer money from people at the bottom to people at the people at the bottom tend to spend all their money. The people at the top don't spend all the money. And again, it leads to weak global aggregate demand.